Hello, and welcome to The Lazy Scientist. Tonight, I invite you to journey with me into the hushed and hidden world of plants. A world so quiet that most of us overlook it, and yet so intricate that once you begin to notice, it feels like stepping into another dimension. Here, time stretches long and thin. A single hour for you might be the span of 1,000 subtle movements for a tree. While animals dart, leap, cry, and howl, plants prefer to whisper through chemistry, through color, through the patient shifting of their bodies toward the sun. Leaves do not shout, roots do not stampede, and flowers never run away. Yet they are ceaselessly alive, ceaselessly working. It is a world of silence that hums with life just beneath the threshold of our perception. I hope this exploration doesn't prove so compelling that you lose all thought of rest. But if it does, at least your sleepless night will be exchanged for a journey into knowledge, one that reveals the incredible complexity behind the green forms you pass every day. And there are perhaps worse companions for insomnia than the steady company of trees, grasses, and flowers. Before we dive deeper, allow me a small moment of gratitude. If you find yourself soothed by these wanderings through science, I'd be thankful if you tapped the like button and subscribed. It allows these calm explorations to reach other restless minds across the world. And as you settle in, maybe with a blanket pulled up or lying back in a chair with heavy eyelids, I'd love to know where you are listening from and what time the clock reads for you at this very moment. The comments always feel like a map of this channel's reach, little dots of light scattered across continents, all connected by a shared fascination with the quiet side of science. So now, loosen your shoulders, soften your jaw, and let your breath fall into a slower rhythm. Picture your thoughts stretching out like a slow-motion time-lapse of a vine curling up a trellis, or a sunflower shifting its golden face with the arc of the sun. This is your reminder. This video is not medical advice, not a prescription for sleep, not a replacement for speaking kindly to your plants, though that last practice has never done any harm. This is simply education carried in a gentle voice, relaxation born from the rhythms of science. Plants, though, are easy to dismiss. They don't purr, they don't chase, they don't wag or whimper. They appear passive, like ornaments added to the world's design. They stand there, silent, content to bask in light or sway with breezes. But the truth is far richer. Beneath the stillness lies intricate machinery, systems more elegant than many human inventions. They are not background decorations. They are the foundation upon which nearly every food chain rests. The oxygen makers, the soil holders, the slow-moving engineers of life. Let us look closely at what makes them what they are. A plant, at its most basic, is built from 3 organs: roots, stems, and leaves. To our eyes, these might seem plain, but each is a marvel, each as important as heart or lung or muscle in an animal. And when woven together, they form a seamless whole. An organism capable of feats of survival that would astonish us if only we could see them unfold at their natural pace. Beneath the soil lies the first of these marvels, the roots. Roots are the anchors, tying a plant to its home, holding it upright against winds and rains. But anchoring is only part of their work. Roots are explorers, endless seekers. Imagine a dark underground world, and at its edge, countless tips reaching forward, testing, tasting. They do not grope blindly. They are exquisitely sensitive. They can feel gravity's pull, always bending downward. They can sense gradients of water, sniffing out moisture in patches of dry soil. They can detect chemicals, stretching toward nutrients, retreating from toxins. When a root meets a stone, it may divide and curl around it. When it finds soil too compact, it slows, conserving energy. A root system, when mapped, is like a vast network of tunnels beneath a city, branching and weaving, expanding always. A single oak, ancient and broad, may have roots stretching 2 or 3 times the width of its canopy. Beneath your feet lies an entire architecture, alive, communicating, and sometimes even cooperative. In some forests, neighboring trees allow their roots to fuse, sharing water and nutrients across species. In others, fungi weave into roots, forming symbiotic partnerships, a hidden web that scientists sometimes call the wood wide web. Here, messages and resources pass invisibly. Nutrients are traded like currency, and trees support one another in silence. Above the soil, the stem rises, the bridge between the hidden world below and the sunlit world above. At first glance, the stem seems plain, a straight shaft, a pole to hold the leaves. Yet inside, it is filled with life. The stem lifts leaves high toward the sun, but it also carries the plant's lifeblood. Imagine it as a pair of highways running side by side. The xylem and the phloem. Through the xylem, water and minerals race upward, pulled not by a pump, but by the sky itself, by the invisible draw of transpiration. Each droplet evaporating from a leaf tugs on the chain behind it, pulling more and more upward from deep in the roots. It is like sipping through a straw that never empties. The phloem, by contrast, carries sugar, the golden treasure made by leaves. It moves not just downward, but upward too, flowing wherever energy is needed. To the tip of a branch sprouting new buds, to the roots digging deeper, to the storage tissues preparing for winter. It is the plant's postal system, delivering nourishment with quiet efficiency. And stems themselves are not uniform. In deserts, cactus stems are swollen vaults of water, ribbed and pleated to expand like bellows after rainfall. In sugarcane, the stem is filled with sweetness, storing reserves in case the world turns harsh. In bamboo, the stem becomes hard and strong, tall enough and tough enough to build houses. A stem is not just a stick. It is infrastructure, storage, strength, and pathway all at once. But of all the organs, leaves may be the most enchanting. Thin, flat, delicate, and yet they are engines of life. Each one is a solar panel, a factory, a breath of the planet. Through small pores called stomata, leaves inhale carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen inside. Thousands upon thousands of chloroplasts absorb sunlight, capturing its energy with pigments of green. Here, in quiet, invisible chemistry, light becomes sugar, energy locked into molecules of glucose. This process, photosynthesis, is the miracle that fuels nearly every life form. Without it, the world would fall silent indeed. Leaves, though, are not all alike. Each is a story written by its environment. The needle of a pine, narrow and waxy, is a strategy to survive cold and dry air. The broad expanse of a banana leaf is an attempt to capture every photon in a jungle where shadows crowd in from every side. The fat, fleshy leaf of a succulent is a reservoir, hoarding water drop by drop. Across the planet, leaf shapes are a gallery of adaptation, a museum of design born from necessity. And even within a single species, leaves are flexible. Place a plant in deep shade and it grows long and spindly, its leaves thin and spread wide. Place the same plant in bright sun and it stays short, sturdy, its leaves thicker and fewer. This flexibility, known as phenotypic plasticity, is part of what makes plants so resilient. They are not fixed in form, but forever adjusting, forever experimenting with new strategies for survival. And then there are the special cases, the little tricks plants use to outwit their world. Tendrils, thin and spiraled, search the air like fingers, wrapping tightly around anything they touch, pulling the plant upward to reach the light. Thorns and spines stand as guardians, warning away herbivores with sharpness. Tubers, like potatoes, are swollen underground stems filled with starch, little treasure chests of food to fuel new growth when the time comes. Bulbs, like onions and tulips, are underground storage organs layered like secret vaults, waiting quietly through winter for the warmth of spring to awaken them. Flowers, too, are more than beauty. They are intricate tools of reproduction, bright colors and sweet scents, carefully designed to lure pollinators. Bees, birds, bats, beetles, even gusts of wind are recruited into the task of carrying pollen. From these acts come seeds, and from seeds come fruits. Fruits are clever packages, bribing animals with sweetness, clinging to fur with hooks, or flying free on puffs of air. All are strategies to send the next generation farther, wider, safer. So much intricacy, and yet this is only the beginning. For the true marvel of plants lies not only in their structure, but in their behavior, a kind of slow intelligence that challenges our assumptions about what it means to be aware. Plants, for centuries, were seen as little more than automatons, green machines that absorbed sunlight, exhaled oxygen, and existed quietly in the background while the real drama of life unfolded with animals. But this view has begun to unravel. Researchers now reveal that plants are not passive at all. They are aware, responsive, and astonishingly capable of solving problems in their own way. They may not have brains, but they have strategies. They may not think as we do, but they behave as though they are constantly measuring, adjusting, and deciding. Take, for instance, the humble pea plant. When given the chance to climb, it does not simply grow blindly in one direction. Its tendrils wave in the air, searching, tasting the space around them. Place a pole nearby, and the plant will find it. Move the pole, and the tendrils adjust their course. Offer two poles, one short but close, the other tall but farther away, and the plant seems to evaluate the options. Often, it chooses the taller pole, investing time in what will offer better, long-term support. This is not reflex alone. It is assessment, as though the plant were quietly choosing the strategy that offers the greatest reward. Or consider the sensitive plant, Mimosa pudica, whose leaves fold shut at the slightest touch. Tap it gently, and the leaflets fold like a closing book. Scientists once assumed this was purely mechanical, a built-in reflex. But in one clever experiment, plants were dropped repeatedly from a short height. At first, every drop triggered the dramatic folding response. But over time, the plants stopped reacting. They had learned the fall was harmless, conserving their energy instead of wasting it. Weeks later, the plants still remembered. A memory without neurons, without a brain. Even more striking are experiments showing something like classical conditioning. In a maze, plants were exposed to a fan blowing alongside a light source. After repeated pairings, the fan alone became enough to draw their growth. They had learned to associate the fan with the reward of light. This is the language of memory, of association, of learning, carried out not in a nervous system, but in a distributed network of cells. How do plants manage this? through a web of chemical signals, hormones, and even electrical pulses. Yes, electrical signals, surging along plant tissues at speeds not unlike nerve impulses in animals. When one leaf is wounded by an insect, an electrical pulse shoots through the plant, alerting other leaves to prepare their defenses. Hormones travel through tissues like messengers, instructing cells to grow, to close stomata, to thicken walls, to release chemicals. It is a kind of intelligence not housed in a single command center, but spread out, woven into the entire fabric of the plant's body. And plants are not silent with one another. They communicate constantly, though we rarely notice. When a caterpillar chews on a tomato leaf, the plant releases a puff of volatile chemicals. Nearby leaves sense it, and so do neighboring plants. They begin producing bitter compounds to make themselves less appetizing, priming their defenses before the predator arrives. Different attackers trigger different chemical cries, one sent for aphids, another for caterpillars, another for pathogens. It is not random distress. It is specific, targeted, honed by millions of years of evolutionary duels. Beneath the ground, the story becomes even richer. Roots are not just drinkers, they are diplomats and warriors. They extend into soil, exploring like scouts. When they find a patch rich in nutrients, they branch and spread, exploiting it. When they encounter toxins, they retreat. Roots even seem to recognize kin. Studies show that plants growing next to relatives compete less fiercely, their roots spreading more gently. When planted among strangers, they compete more aggressively, pushing outward to claim space. It is not emotion as we know it, but it is a kind of social awareness written in chemistry and growth. And then there is the remarkable partnership with fungi. Tiny filaments of fungi weave into root systems, creating a symbiotic web that connects plant to plant, tree to tree. Through these fungal threads, nutrients are traded. A tree in sunlight may send extra carbon down through its roots into the network, and that carbon may travel to a shaded neighbor struggling to grow. Messages may pass too, signals of drought, warnings of pests. The forest floor becomes not just a crowd of individuals, but a community, a society, bound by invisible threads of exchange. Light itself is also a form of conversation. Plants can detect the faintest shifts in the ratio of red to far red light, a clue that taller neighbors are stealing the sun. In response, they elongate their stems, racing slowly upward in a quiet competition. Each plant is engaged in a duel, a negotiation, a balancing act, not with fists or fangs, but with growth, stretch, and shade. What makes this intelligence so remarkable is its resilience. Animals, including us, centralize their awareness in a brain. Damage the brain, and the animal falters. Plants have no such vulnerability. Their intelligence is decentralized, spread across every part of their body. If a branch is cut away, the plant does not despair. If roots are damaged, it regrows. If nearly the entire body is destroyed, a tiny fragment can sometimes rebuild the whole. The instructions are everywhere. The awareness is everywhere. It is an organism that can lose parts of itself again and again and still persist. And plants, it seems, do not just react. They anticipate. In environments where drought comes in regular cycles, plants adjust their internal chemistry ahead of time, bracing for the next dry season. In regions where grazing animals return year after year, plants begin to produce defensive compounds before the first bite. This is memory, prediction, and preparation, not in the sense of conscious thought, but in the biological sense of a body that carries its history forward into its responses. So when you look at a tree, still and silent, remember what is really happening. Beneath the bark, pulses of water surge upward, sugars travel downward, signals flash from cell to cell, roots stretch outward, tasting, testing, choosing. Leaves turn slightly with each hour, stomata open and close with each breath of air. Invisible scents drift into the wind, carrying messages to allies and warnings to neighbors. Each plant is a network of tiny decisions, each leaf and root tip a sensor, each tissue a responder. It is less a single creature than a democracy of parts, intelligence spread wide like a web. Think of what that means. If you sit in a meadow or a forest clearing, you are not surrounded by silent statues. You are in the midst of beings constantly adjusting, conversing, competing, and cooperating. You are in the company of strategists that remember the last drought, prepare for the next storm, choose where to lean and where to branch. You are surrounded by intelligence, not human, not animal, but green, patient, and quiet. And if you could shrink yourself down to the scale of soil, slip between the grains of sand, and walk among the roots, you would see a city hidden from our eyes. Tunnels stretch out like avenues. Nutrients flow like currency, traded from one root to another, or from fungus to plant. Messages pass like whispers. Some roots compete fiercely, releasing toxins to push rivals away. Others share generously, feeding their neighbors. It is an underground society, a metropolis of exchange and intrigue. Above ground, the forest may seem silent, but below, the conversation never ends. This is the silent world of plants, a world that seems still but is alive with invisible movement, invisible voices. It is not a world of rush or frenzy. It is a world of patience, of careful choices, of lives lived at a pace we cannot easily see. Yet it is a world that sustains us all, that fills our air, that holds our soil, that feeds every bite we take. The green quiet is not empty. It is wisdom stretched thin and slow, spread across leaves and roots and stems, unfolding like a long story told in whispers. So the next time you pause to water a houseplant, or the next time you walk past a tree in the street, stop for a moment. You are looking at a being that senses, remembers, communicates, and endures. It may not think in words, it may not move with haste, but it is aware of its place in the world. It knows where the sun rises. It knows when danger is near. It knows how to survive. And perhaps, in its unhurried way, it knows something we do not. That life does not always require rushing forward. That survival can be found in patience. That resilience is born from spreading intelligence wide and deep. Intelligence, it turns out, comes in many forms. Some are fast, loud, and fleeting. Others are green, slow, and silent, swaying gently in the breeze, outlasting storms, outsmarting the world, one patient choice at a time. But the underground story goes even deeper. Roots do not simply spread out into the soil like passive drinking straws. They are explorers, but they are also participants in a community. The world beneath our feet is alive with connections, exchanges, warnings, and rivalries, and roots are the central players in this drama. To watch them closely in time-lapse would be to see something almost animal-like, the tips nosing through the soil, pausing, changing course, pressing forward again. But more than their movement, it is their relationships that make this hidden world so extraordinary. One of the most remarkable relationships roots form is with fungi. Not just any fungi, but a special group known as the mycorrhizal fungi. These partners have been with plants for hundreds of millions of years, since the very beginning of life's colonization of land. They form what scientists call a mutualistic symbiosis, which simply means both sides benefit. The fungi wrap around the roots and in some cases penetrate into the root tissue itself, creating a finely tuned interface where resources are traded. The fungi deliver minerals that roots alone would struggle to gather: phosphorus, nitrogen, and other nutrients hidden deep in the soil. In return, the plant sends down sugar, the glucose it crafted high above in its leaves with the power of sunlight. It is a fair exchange. And it is the foundation of nearly every terrestrial ecosystem we know. What is astonishing is how widespread this arrangement is. Over 90% of land plants are thought to depend on some form of mycorrhizal partnership. Without fungi, they would starve in poor soils. Without plants, the fungi would have no energy source at all. Together, they weave an invisible economy beneath the earth, one that sustains forests, meadows, and fields. And this economy does not stop at one-to-one trade. Because the fungal filaments, the hyphae, spread outward, they link one root system to another. In doing so, they create enormous networks that tie together whole communities of plants. Through these fungal connections, messages and resources can pass from one individual to another. The result is something scientists have begun to call the Wood Wide Web, a vast communication and support system stretching silently beneath the soil. Imagine walking through a forest. Above ground, you see the trunks, each tree standing as if independent, each reaching its own branches toward the sky. But below ground, those trees are laced together in a web of fungal threads. A tree attacked by insects may release a signal into this web. Its neighbors, receiving the warning, can alter their own chemistry, thickening their leaves, producing bitter compounds, or closing their stomata to conserve water. It looks almost like collective defense, not telepathy, but biology, networks, and evolution working together to create resilience. And sometimes the communication carries more than just warnings. In nutrient-poor conditions, trees have been observed transferring food to one another. A parent tree may share with its seedlings, feeding them sugars until they are strong enough to capture sunlight on their own. But sometimes the generosity crosses family lines. Large, established individuals have been documented funneling resources into struggling neighbors of different species, a kind of cross-species subsidy that helps keep the forest as a whole intact. The largest and oldest among them, the so-called mother trees, are hubs of this underground economy. Their roots and fungal partners stretch across great distances, supporting not just their own kin, but the wider community. Is this altruism? Perhaps not in the human sense. A healthier forest benefits the mother tree too, ensuring the environment in which her own offspring grow remains strong. But the effect is striking. Cooperation, sharing, support, all happening in the silence beneath the leaf litter. It reshapes our picture of plants, not as lonely strivers, but as participants in communities that share information and sustenance. Yet not all is kindness. The underground world is also fiercely competitive. Plants growing in close quarters vie for space, water, and nutrients, and some have evolved ways to sabotage their rivals. Certain species release chemical compounds into the soil that inhibit the growth of neighbors. This process, called allelopathy, is a form of chemical warfare. The black walnut tree is infamous for it, exuding a compound called juglone that poisons many other plants trying to grow nearby. A walnut tree, surrounded by wilted competitors, is not unlucky. It is winning by force. It is throwing chemical shade, making sure rivals fail before they can compete for sunlight. Even among relatives, the balance between cooperation and competition can change. In some situations, plants seem to recognize their kin and tone down their competitive behaviors, growing more gently when crowded by siblings. In others, especially when resources are scarce, the rivalry intensifies, and they push against one another as fiercely as against strangers. It is not a simple story of peace or conflict, but a dance of both, shifting with the conditions of soil, season, and scarcity. Roots themselves are sensory structures of astonishing subtlety. They do not merely grow forward blindly. They taste chemical gradients, detect changes in pH, sense the compaction of the soil, and even listen to their environment in ways we are only beginning to understand. In controlled experiments, scientists have played the sound of running water with no actual water present, and roots grew toward it. This suggests that roots can detect vibrations, using them as cues to find life-saving resources. The exact mechanism is still a mystery, but it likely involves tiny mechanoreceptors, cells able to feel shifts in pressure and movement. A root tip, then, is not just a probe. It is a listening device, an instrument tuned to the subtlest whispers of the earth. And they can detect one another. In studies where roots grew in close proximity without yet touching, their behavior changed depending on who was nearby. Roots seem to distinguish between their own tissues, those of close relatives, and those of strangers. They altered growth accordingly, branching less near kin, more aggressively near competitors. This implies not just awareness, but recognition, a kind of identity sensed chemically or electrically, an ability to know who is who in the darkness. Roots are also the first line of defense in the plant's immune system, recruiting beneficial microbes to fight on their behalf. Legumes like peas and beans go further, cultivating whole communities of nitrogen-fixing bacteria in specialized nodules. Inside these tiny root swellings, bacteria transform atmospheric nitrogen into forms the plant can use, enriching the soil for themselves and for others. It is like hosting a miniature factory underground, a full-time staff of microbial partners working tirelessly in exchange for sugar and shelter. All of this underground activity is not just fascinating, it is essential. The strength of an ecosystem often hinges on what is happening below the surface. When root systems and their microbial partners thrive, the plants above are stronger, more resilient to drought, pests, and disease. But when these networks are disrupted by compaction, pollution, deforestation, or overtilling, the entire system weakens. Forests falter, grasslands degrade, crops lose their vigor. Understanding the hidden intelligence of roots and fungi is not merely curiosity. It is the key to sustaining life. In recent years, farmers and gardeners have begun paying closer attention to this subterranean world. The health of soil has returned to the forefront of agricultural thought. Practices like crop rotation, cover cropping, and reduced tillage are designed not just to produce food, but to preserve the underground networks that make food production possible. To care for soil is to care for the invisible city of roots and microbes that sustain the plants above. It is, in a sense, a return to partnership, a recognition that what happens in the dark beneath our feet echoes upward into every leaf and grain. Even beyond agriculture, the lessons of these root networks have begun to inspire new ideas in science and engineering. The fungal web, decentralized and self-healing, has been studied as a model for internet design, robotics, and logistics systems. Here is a network with no central control, yet astonishing resilience, able to adapt and regrow when damaged. What human systems could learn from such quiet intelligence is only beginning to be explored, and perhaps the most profound part of all is the reminder it gives us. Beneath every step we take lies a hidden world, a web of roots and fungi, whispering chemical messages, sharing food, competing fiercely, defending against enemies, listening to water, feeling the vibrations of the earth itself. The soil is not empty. It is alive, filled with silent voices, speaking a language of molecules, vibrations, and growth. The next time you walk barefoot through grass or sit beneath the shade of a tree, you are sitting atop an invisible society, one as complex and dynamic as any above ground. Silent, hidden, but never still. The hidden sensitivity of plants extends far beyond roots and fungi. It might be easy to imagine that because they lack eyes, ears, and noses, they are unaware of their surroundings. But this is only because we are conditioned to look for our own kinds of senses in the bodies of others. Plants do not see with eyes, but they read light. They do not hear with ears, but they feel vibration. They do not taste with tongues, but their roots can sense and interpret the chemistry of the soil with astonishing precision. In many ways, they are among the most observant creatures on the planet. Observant not in our hurried, moment-to-moment way, but in a quieter, slower rhythm that registers every detail of their world. Light is perhaps the most obvious sense, and yet even here, the story is far richer than we often imagine. Plants are not simply aware of whether it is day or night. They can measure how much light there is, what angle it is arriving from, how long it lasts, and even what color it is. Special proteins in their tissues, known as photoreceptors, act as their invisible eyes. Phytochromes detect red and far-red light. Cryptochromes and phototropins detect blue light. With these, a plant builds a full picture of its light environment. When light filters through a forest canopy, the red wavelengths are absorbed by the upper leaves, while far red passes through. A plant detecting more far red than red knows it is in shade, and it responds by elongating, stretching upward in an attempt to outgrow its neighbors. This is shade avoidance, a sophisticated interpretation of subtle differences in color that guides architectural decisions about how to grow. Other responses are even more dynamic. Some leaves adjust their position hour by hour, pivoting minutely to capture more light. In certain species, this movement becomes dramatic. Sunflowers turning their faces to follow the sun's arc across the sky in a slow but steady heliotropism. To the human eye, it looks poetic, almost whimsical, but it is in fact a finely tuned solar tracking strategy, maximizing photosynthesis by keeping their panels always pointed toward the source of energy. All of this occurs under the guidance of internal clocks. Plants, like animals, have circadian rhythms, internal timers that cycle over 24 hours. Even in total darkness, they continue these rhythms for days, anticipating dawn and dusk. This is not reaction, but prediction. A body remembering the cycles of the world and adjusting itself in advance. Flowers open at times when their preferred pollinators are most active. Leaves close their stomata at night to conserve water. Entire suites of chemicals are produced or broken down according to the hour, as though the plant carries an internal calendar, ticking softly inside every cell. Touch is another sense, one that plants respond to with surprising immediacy. The word is thigmotropism, and it is on display every time a vine curls around a trellis. A tendril brushing a surface begins to coil, the cells on one side growing faster than the other until the spiral tightens into a grip. Watch a vine climb a fence in time-lapse, and it looks uncannily like an animal searching with fingers. Some plants are even faster. The mimosa, sometimes called the sensitive plant, folds its leaves instantly when brushed. A sudden drop in water pressure inside specialized cells makes the leaflets collapse, closing like shutters. Within minutes, they reopen, ready to respond again. This is defense, a way to startle or discourage herbivores. Carnivorous plants push touch even further. The Venus flytrap keeps trigger hairs inside its lobes. Only when a hair is touched twice within about 20 seconds does the trap snap shut. This precision prevents wasted effort. It is not a mind calculating, but it is a system discriminating signal from noise, filtering chance bumps from genuine prey. Beyond touch, plants seem able to perceive vibration, even sound. Sound, after all, is nothing more than air or soil molecules vibrating. In experiments, roots have been shown to grow toward the sound of running water, even when the soil itself is dry. Other studies suggest plants can distinguish between frequencies. The chewing vibrations of caterpillars, for example, have been recorded and played back to leaves. In response, the plants increased their defensive chemistry, as though they had learned the sound of danger. It is not hearing as we know it, but it is listening in another form. Imagine a leaf, silent and still, yet attuned to the faint rasp of insect jaws. Chemical detection is perhaps their most powerful sense. Plants continuously sample the air and soil for molecules that carry meaning. When attacked, many species release clouds of volatile organic compounds, invisible puffs that drift outward. Neighbors detect them and begin to alter their own defenses, producing toxins, toughening tissues, or summoning predators of the attacker. A caterpillar munching on one plant may inadvertently trigger a whole patch of plants to become bitter, unpalatable, or to attract wasps that prey on caterpillars. This is a chemical conversation, a language without words. And like language, it has dialects. Sagebrush, for instance, communicates more effectively with close relatives than with strangers. Tobacco plants are more responsive to local varieties of chemical messages than to signals from far-off populations. It is as if plants listen more closely to their kin, or understand the accent of their neighbors better than that of outsiders. They even anticipate each other underground. Roots secrete chemical cues that reveal their presence. Nearby plants pick up on these cues and adjust their growth. Some withdraw to avoid crowding. Others push forward more aggressively, competing for space and resources before their rivals can. The soil becomes not just a place of growth, but of negotiation, a conversation carried out molecule by molecule. Gravity is another constant input. Tiny starch-filled organelles called stateless settle inside plant cells according to the pull of gravity, letting the plant know which way is down. Roots grow downward, stems grow upward, always correcting themselves if they are tilted. A potted plant laid on its side does not remain sideways for long. Within hours or days, its shoots curve upward again. Even the smallest seedlings use this sense to orient themselves, ensuring that roots bury into soil while leaves reach the light. Moisture, too, is tracked with astonishing accuracy. Roots can sense differences in water availability, so slight they would escape most instruments. A root tip can detect a gradient of only a few percent between one side and another, and it bends toward the wetter soil. This is hydrotropism, the secret that allows plants to find and follow hidden veins of moisture underground. They are divining rods of flesh, tuned by evolution to trace the invisible map of water. Temperature, likewise, is part of their vocabulary of awareness. Many species require a period of cold before flowering, a process called vernalization. This ensures that they do not bloom too early in spring, when frost could kill their flowers. Seeds, too, may lie dormant until they have felt the right combination of temperature, moisture, and light, waiting for the perfect moment to emerge. Their patience is staggering, some seeds persisting for years, decades, even centuries before awakening when conditions align. Taken together, this suite of senses provides plants with a rich and detailed awareness of their world. It is not awareness as we know it, not conscious thought or feeling, but a constant monitoring, a steady flow of information guiding their every move. Each curl of a tendril, each twist of a root, each unfolding of a leaf is informed by these signals. And perhaps most striking is that plants not only sense their environment, they also remember it. A mimosa plant that has learned to ignore harmless drops retains that lesson for weeks. Seeds track the seasons through cycles of temperature. Plants exposed to drought may respond more efficiently when the next dry spell arrives, as though recalling past hardship. This is memory without neurons, an echo of experience encoded in chemical and structural changes. When we put all of this together, the fungal alliances, the chemical conversations, the sensory abilities, the memory and anticipation, the picture that emerges is one of intelligence spread across tissues and time. It is not centralized in a brain, not expressed in thought, but it is intelligence nonetheless. A plant lives in a world it cannot leave, and yet within that rooted existence, it has found ways to perceive, adapt, and respond with remarkable subtlety. So the next time you pass a patch of grass or walk beneath a row of trees, consider what is happening silently all around you. Beneath your feet, roots and fungi are trading, competing, whispering. Above, leaves are listening to light, turning to the sun, tightening against pests. Flowers are measuring the hour, opening for pollinators. Seeds are waiting with patience beyond measure. It is a world that appears still, but in truth, it is brimming with awareness, layered with strategies, alive with hidden intelligence. Which brings us back to the quiet chemistry inside a leaf where sunlight becomes movement, structure, and memory. After the first burst of light work has split water and released its bright exhale of oxygen. The hydrogen does not vanish. It lingers in the form of high-energy helpers, ATP and NADPH, the plant's little rechargeable batteries that carry energy from place to place. With those in hand, the story moves into the second stage, often called the Calvin cycle. The name can be misleading, since these reactions do not require darkness. They simply do not need light directly. They unfold in the stroma, that gentle fluid space surrounding the stacks of green thylakoids, where the cell conducts its quiet accounting. Here, carbon dioxide drawn from the air is welcomed in and paired with energy from those ATP and NADPH batteries. And out of that patient assembly line comes glucose. That single word, glucose, is the prologue to 1,000 different stories. The plant can burn it immediately for energy, or set it aside as starch for leaner times, or weave it into cellulose to build walls that will later become trunks, stems, and crisp leaves. This is the universal building block made from sunshine and air, small enough to dissolve in sap, sturdy enough to become wood. From this simple molecule arises flavor in an apple, the firmness of a pea pod, the fiber of a linen shirt. That is the miracle sitting, almost shyly, behind the green. Every food chain rests here. Herbivores gather the sugars that leaves worked to assemble. Carnivores gather those herbivores. Fungi, bacteria, and the slow turning of soil return the leftovers. And all of it, every nibble and breath, depends on that invisible work inside chloroplasts. A single tree may carry hundreds of thousands of leaves, and each of those leaves holds millions of chloroplasts. And each chloroplast stacks its thylakoids like tiny green pancakes, all busy without noise or complaint. It is an entire solar farm folded into tissue, humming without wires or plugs, self-repairing, self-regulating, and always on time. Plants are not passive panels. They tune their photosynthesis moment by moment. In bright conditions, they accelerate. In shade, they slow. In dry air, they close their stomata to conserve water, even though that choice limits carbon dioxide intake and trims the day's sugar budget. A plant lives inside a constant balancing act, trading a little water here for a little energy there, budgeting for growth, repair, and defense with the discipline of a careful accountant. Because conditions vary, so do strategies. Most plants use what botanists call C3 photosynthesis, named for the first 3-carbon compound formed in the Calvin cycle. In heat and dryness, however, C3 shows its limits. The enzyme that normally grabs carbon dioxide, rubisco, can become confused by the rising concentration of oxygen, picking up the wrong partner and wasting precious energy. Some lineages solve that problem with a refined plan, C4 photosynthesis. Corn and sugarcane are classic examples. They separate the steps of carbon capture and sugar making into distinct cell types, concentrating carbon dioxide where rubisco works, which reduces waste. Think of it as a kitchen laid out so prep and cooking happen in different rooms. Impractical in a small apartment perhaps, but brilliant when the air grows hot and moisture is scarce. Other plants, cacti and many succulents among them, take a different route known as CAM. They open their stomata at night, when the air is cooler and kinder, and store carbon in a temporary form until daylight returns. Then they run the light reactions while keeping pores closed, a thrifty arrangement that saves water while still letting them build sugar. This is one reason A plump desert plant can look almost serene during a heat wave. It bit its breathing in the dark and is now spending that quiet savings. Across geological time, photosynthesis has done more than feed forests. It has changed the air itself. Early Earth carried little free oxygen. It was the rise of photosynthetic organisms, especially ancient cyanobacteria, that began to leak oxygen into the oceans and sky. Over long spans, this built to what scientists call the Great Oxygenation Event, a shift that altered the planet's chemistry and opened the door for oxygen-hungry metabolisms like ours. Even now, a vast share of the oxygen you draw into your lungs comes not from trees alone, but from the smallest of workers, the photosynthetic plankton and algae of the sea. Every other breath owes something to those drifting specks. The same chemistry also helps steady the climate. Plants remove carbon dioxide from the air and tuck it into wood, roots, leaves, and soil. Forests, prairies, wetlands, even modest hedgerows act as carbon banks. When those banks are cut, burned, or allowed to erode, the stored carbon returns to the atmosphere. Understanding how photosynthesis responds to higher carbon dioxide, shifting rainfall, and rising temperatures is central to predicting how landscapes will change. It is also why protecting habitats and planting wisely matter, not as decoration, but as living infrastructure that locks carbon away and keeps water moving through the ground like a slow, protective pulse. For all the chemistry, the beauty is in the simplicity. Sunlight that we cannot eat or hold is caught by a leaf and turned into something we can taste, wear, and breathe. The starch in a potato, the sweetness of a peach, the oxygen in a deep yawn, all trace back to a chloroplast trusting the dawn. It is an industrious little factory that never clocks out, a solar-powered chemist placing one atom after another with quiet grace. Now imagine being a plant while all of this is happening. You cannot step aside. You cannot duck into shade or run from a nibble. Yet you live, grow, and often flourish. A large part of that success comes from behavior that is slow enough to escape casual notice, but unmistakable when seen in time-lapse. Bending, reaching, curling, pausing, trying again, all guided by a suite of internal chemical messengers that carry instructions through sap, membranes, and microscopic spaces. These messengers are hormones, and they coordinate much of what looks like plant intention. Auxin is the best known, the reliable lead voice in a many-part choir. It shapes growth in shoots and roots, and it is central to phototropism, the gentle leaning toward light many of us see in a window plant. When light strikes one side more than the other, auxin redistributes to the shaded side. Cells there elongate more than their brighter neighbors, and the stem bends toward the sun. The same molecule helps steer roots, although the rules flip underground. Tilt a plant and auxin shifts to the lower side of a root, where, rather than speeding growth, it slows it. So the upper side stretches faster and the root curves downward again. One messenger, two opposite outcomes, depending on context and tissue. Auxin is not alone. Gibberellins encourage stems to lengthen, help seeds break dormancy, and coax flowers to form. If auxin sketches the plan, gibberellins push the scaffolding upward. Cytokinins promote cell division and often pull in a different direction than auxin, nudging a plant to invest more in shoots when conditions favor gathering light, or in roots when the soil is rich and the sky is stingy. Abscisic acid behaves like a patient guardian during stress, especially drought. When water runs short, it signals stomata to close and urges seeds to wait until conditions improve. Ethylene, a gaseous messenger, coordinates ripening. A single fruit releasing a little ethylene can nudge its neighbors along, which is why a ripe banana seems to teach the whole fruit bowl how to hurry. Ethylene also helps seedlings adjust when pushing through soil, favoring sturdier forms over fragile height so they do not snap at the surface. These signals do not bark orders from a central office. They converse. Radios matter more than absolutes. Auxin, balanced against cytokinin, determines leaf and root investments. Abscisic acid, weighed against gibberellin, decides whether a seed sleeps through a cold spell or begins to open enzymes and soften its coat. The outcome is a shifting, responsive choreography rather than a marching routine, more like a jazz ensemble than a parade. From these conversations, movement emerges. Phototropism guides stems toward light. Gravitropism guides roots toward gravity. Phygmotropism guides tendrils as they curl upon touching a support. Watch a vine in sped-up footage, and it seems to search, test, and clasp with a tentative hand. Some movements do not depend on the direction of a stimulus at all. They are nastic responses, driven by internal changes in water pressure. The sensitive plant folds its leaflets when touched, because specialized cells at the leaflet base dump water quickly, collapse, and draw the blades together like closing fans. Minutes later, water returns, the cells regain pressure, and the leaf opens. Morning glories unfurl and close according to light and temperature, the petals moving on schedules set by circadian rhythms and tuned by signals that keep time like a soft metronome. Seed germination shows this gentle tug of messages most clearly. A seed waits until moisture, temperature, and sometimes light align. Abscisic acid argues for patience. Gibberellin suggests it is time. When the moment tips, enzymes wake, stored food is mobilized, the coat softens, and the tiny root emerges to find purchase. Soon the stem lifts, the first leaves spread, chloroplasts switch on, and the newborn settles into the same ancient routine as its elders, trading in light for sugar and sugar for structure. All of this would seem impersonal if not for the precision. A tree growing on a windy ridge lays thicker wood on the windward side. A sapling crowded by a neighbor invests in height, then, finding a gap in the canopy, begins to widen. Leaves alter their angle by degrees through the day, balancing light capture against overheating and water loss. None of this is random. It is adjustment, endlessly refined by feedback, guided by the very signals we have been following. Communication reaches even further than this internal talk. Plants do not only listen inward, they also broadcast outward and eavesdrop upon one another. When a leaf is chewed by an insect, the injury is not just a wound, it is a message. Volatile organic compounds drift from the damaged tissue, and those drifting scents carry information. Nearby plants detect them and begin to prime their defenses, often within minutes. Some thicken their leaves, some increase bitter chemistry, some summon allies, parasitoid wasps among them, that home in on the exact blend of volatiles released by a particular attacker. The recipe matters. A caterpillar produces one signal, a beetle another, and mechanical damage alone produces a different profile, because compounds in insect saliva help trigger the full alarm. A leaf clipped by scissors does not send the same shout as a leaf nibbled by jaws. These messages are not broadcast to empty air. They land on kin and strangers, and the recipients respond with nuance. Some plants react more strongly to signals from relatives. as if a family accent is easier to understand. Others downplay weak warnings and save their energy for threats that linger. The air becomes a medium for conversation, not just scent for our noses, but information for theirs. The soil carries messages too. Roots release chemical cues that announce presence, stress, or even the arrival of pathogens. Through fungal partners, those signals can travel beyond the reach of a single root system, moving along the same networks that share nutrients. In this way, a plant under drought can help prime its neighbors to tighten stomata and adjust metabolism before the dryness reaches them. It is not charity in a human sense. It is survival in a shared environment, where a healthier neighborhood improves everyone's odds. Pollination is communication of a gentler kind. Flowers advertise with color, shape, and scent, and the composition of that perfume is exquisitely tuned. Evening blossoms lift fragrances that appeal to night flyers. Day flowers time their scents to the busiest hours of bees. Some flowers change their aroma after being visited, a little sign that says, politely, "This table has already been served. Try the next one." Others mimic. A few imitate the pheromones of female insects to lure hopeful males. Some orchids resemble the very insects that pollinate them, a complicated trick that has evolved through patient, mutual shaping. What looks like decoration is strategy. Petals, nectar, patterns only visible in ultraviolet, all serve to guide a visitor exactly where the pollen lies and where the reward drips. The plant invests sugar in the gift, because the courier will carry its genes to a partner it will never meet. It is a transaction with beauty as its envelope. And while the air above is busy with signals and couriers, the darkness below continues its steady work. The same roots that listen for water and nutrients, that bend toward moisture gradients, too small for our instruments to feel, also participate in a web of exchange. Fungal hyphae braid among them, multiplying the reach of every root tip, delivering phosphorus and nitrogen from tight pores that roots cannot penetrate, and carrying back the sugars that the plant has offered as payment. In many soils, these threads do more than deliver. They link. Through those connections, a shaded sapling may receive a small stipend of carbon from a neighbor in full sun. A stressed tree may warn the stand around it. Over years, large elders become hubs, feeding, warning, and stabilizing the understory. The effect is not a myth of kindness. It is a reality of connection that makes a forest more resilient than any one tree could be. Competition is woven into this picture as well. Some species release allelopathic chemicals that suppress potential rivals. The black walnut's juglone is a well-known example, shaping the plant community that can thrive in its shade. The result is spacing, pattern, and advantage, all achieved by molecules drifting through soil, rather than by root against root pushing. Even sound, or rather vibration, finds a place in this quiet theater. Roots in controlled experiments have grown toward recordings of water, suggesting that mechanosensitive cells along the root surface can perceive minute vibrations and turn them into directional growth. Leaves exposed to the recorded chewing of caterpillars have increased their defenses in anticipation. The plant does not hear as we do, but it can feel the rhythm of movement, and that is enough to respond wisely. All of this, taken together, is a portrait of distributed intelligence. No central brain directs these choices. Each cell responds to local conditions and to signals from its neighbors, and from that local awareness, a coherent strategy emerges. Memory is encoded not in neurons, but in changes to proteins, hormones, and gene expression. In the way stomata learn the cadence of a dry week, or a mimosa remembers that a jolt is harmless. Anticipation is carried in cycles and clocks, in seeds that refuse to break dormancy until cold has passed, in buds that hold until day length is just right for their pollinators. While we talk about leaves and light, it is easy to forget that roots remain the quiet protagonists of this chapter. They hold the plant steady, yes, but they also map the soil with exquisite care, sampling chemistry, pushing gently where the ground is soft, rerooting where it is compacted, branching generously when a patch of nutrients appears. They recruit partners, fend off pathogens, call for help, and sometimes, with a pinch of selfish chemistry, clear a little space for themselves. Invisible to us, they build the foundation on which the rest of the plant can be brave. And the story keeps widening the farther you follow those quiet threads. The web below us is not a single rope linking two partners. It is a lattice that shifts and rewrites itself as seasons pass. Hyphae colonize new pockets of soil. Old threads decay back into food. New roots push into empty spaces, and everywhere there is exchange. A tree in full sun pays generously because it has surplus carbon to spare. A sapling in deep shade accepts a little help and survives a year it might have lost. Later, when storms open a gap in the canopy and light pours down, that same sapling may repay the neighborhood, sending sweetness outward while it climbs. Signals do not only travel when insects chew. Drought moves through a forest long before every trunk wears the same dry expression. Roots in a shallow hillside feel the decline in soil moisture first. They tighten their stomata, shift their chemistry toward thrift, and send a message along fungal threads that the slope is thirsty. Trees in the hollow below, still comfortable for the moment, can begin to prepare. They may adjust their leaf angles, deepen water channels in their xylem, or shed a little leaf area that would otherwise cost too much water. Preparation buys time, and time is often the difference between stress and failure. There are limits, and the web does not erase them. When a drought is severe, there is only so much water to go around. Some species can still cooperate while competing, sharing warning signals, yet taking the lion's share of water for themselves. Others rely more heavily on chemical boundaries, releasing compounds that discourage neighbor roots from entering a precious patch of damp soil. These tactics are not moral or immoral. They are the result of long histories in different climates, different soils, different communities. A plant that learned to survive in poor, variable ground is more likely to hoard. A plant that flourished in rich, stable ground is more likely to share. The wood wide web is not a single species of fungus with a single habit. It is a diverse guild. Some fungi wrap the outside of roots in a sheath. Others enter the root, weaving between cell walls and forming tiny exchange sites that look under a microscope like miniature trees of their own. Each partnership changes the rules a little. Some fungi are excellent at bringing phosphorus. Others excel at nitrogen. Some tolerate dry conditions better. Others prefer cool, moist soil. A plant in a mixed forest may partner with several species at once, diversifying its supply lines the way a careful merchant refuses to rely on one root. If a thread fails, another can take its place. Because this network is so influential, disturbances that seem small on the surface can ring loudly below. Heavy machinery compacts soil and crushes pore spaces where air and water should move. Hyphae cannot thread through concrete. Repeated tillage shreds fungal networks before they can mature. Excess salt from de-icing roads sours the soil, shifting which microbes can thrive. Pollutants alter the slow chemistry that roots use to recruit allies. Remove the old elders that acted as hubs, and a stand of trees can lose more than shade. It can lose the memory stored in roots and threads, the trusted connections that made the group more than the sum of its stems. There is hope in that same sensitivity. Practices that protect structure and diversity allow the web to rebuild. Reduced tillage preserves fungal highways from season to season. Cover crops feed the network when cash crops are not in the ground, keeping partners alive through winter. Mulch cushions the soil from pounding rain and helps water soak in rather than race away. Mixed plantings invite a more complex community of fungi and bacteria, which in turn stabilizes nutrient flows and reduces disease. Even in cities, where soil is often tired and thin, careful planting and patient stewardship can coax a network back to life. A street tree, supported by a rich circle of mulch, paired with mycorrhizal inoculum at planting, watered deeply and infrequently, so the roots chase moisture down rather than linger at the surface, will quietly stitch itself into the ground. Over years, that single tree becomes less lonely. Its roots meet those of neighbors, and the invisible web grows under the pavement's edge. If you stand on a forest path and listen, the loudest voice is wind in the canopy, but the slowest conversation is underfoot. A pine drops needles that acidify the surface a little, selecting for partners it prefers. A maple sends sugar downward in autumn as leaves withdraw their nutrients and fall. A gift for microbes that will turn that litter into next spring's mineral budget. A fungus shepherds a trickle of phosphorus toward a thirsty root tip. A seed wakes where a parent fell because the soil already knows how to host that lineage. In this way, trees are not tiny or perfect. A place becomes itself. The community of plants and partners writes a biography in texture, scent, and chemistry, and that biography guides the next chapter. Because we are outsiders to that pace, we often learn about these relationships through experiments that speed or isolate parts of the story. Researchers have shaded a single branch of a tree while leaving others in full sun, then traced labeled carbon as it flowed into the ground. They have seen that carbon appear in a neighbor's roots, evidence that sugars can cross from one individual to another through fungal threads. They have wounded one plant with grazing insects and measured the rise of defensive compounds in uninjured neighbors that share the same underground network. They have enclosed leaves to study airborne signals and still seen effects travel through soil alone, a hint that the web offers several paths for the same message. At the scale of an individual plant, the most surprising part remains how many decisions arise without any central authority. A root tip is an explorer with a tiny toolbox. It tests for water, calcium, nitrate, and phosphate. It listens for the soft friction of wetness in the soil. It swerves from toxins, slows in compact ground, branches when resources increase. All of this happens within millimeters. Each decision is local. Yet from millions of these small choices made by many tips, a well-formed architecture appears, one that mirrors the patchwork of the soil it occupies. The plant has mapped its world by becoming a map of it. The same is true above ground, where leaves adjust their angle to balance light and temperature. When the air grows harsh, a leaf might tilt slightly to reduce heat. When clouds wander in, it flattens again, hungry for photons. Stomata open and close according to a calculus that weighs humidity, carbon dioxide demand, and risk of water loss. A leaf never takes more risk than it must. If the air is dry and the soil is moist, it may still be generous. If the soil is dry, even a humid breeze will not tempt it to spend too freely. That caution is how a plant carries water from dawn to dusk. Plants remember, not as stories, but as altered thresholds. A seed that has felt winter waits for a set number of warm days before considering spring safe. A leaf that has survived one round of herbivory is quicker to respond to the next nibble. A root that has found a vein of moisture branches more readily in that direction the next time. The body is its memory, and experience rewrites the settings that govern response. Over years, a tree becomes a record of the weather it has lived through. Tight rings mark lean seasons. Wide rings mark generous ones. Twists in grain mark wind that always came from one direction. The crown retells a story of light that used to fall from a gap now filled. There is elegance in how these memories travel across generations. Some of it is simple genetics. Plants born from parents that endured drought carry alleles that help them do so. Some of it is epigenetic, the subtle marks left upon DNA packaging that can influence how readily certain genes switch on. Seeds formed during stress can arrive with slightly different settings, primed to grow in a world that might repeat the same hardships. None of this guarantees success, but all of it nudges probability toward survival. In the most generous landscapes, the web expresses itself as abundance. Prairie grasses send roots meters deep, braiding with fungi that mine minerals from particles of ancient rock. When fire runs through, much of the living system is below ground. The blaze clears last year's stems, recycles nutrients, and the prairie responds with a flush of green that proves resilience is often a matter of having your most important parts where flames cannot reach. Deeply shaded seedlings persist for years, neither dying nor rising, waiting for chance to knock a hole in the ceiling. When it comes, the stored carbon they borrowed through the network becomes a ladder. Few close and both fail. Just four enough and both can persist. Succulents save by breathing at night and spending in daylight. Annuals string through their cycle in the single wet season. All of these strategies to answer the same question. How do you root yourself in one place and still remain flexible enough to meet what the sky offers? Human hands can either amplify or muffle this hidden intelligence. In farms where rotations include legumes, the soil's nitrogen budget is subsidized by bacterial partners living in nodules. In orchards where grasses grow under trees rather than bare earth, networks remain intact, and disease often falls because the community is complex and busy. A poor foothold for a single pest to dominate. In gardens where compost feeds microbes and mulch shades the ground, water lingers longer and plants ask less of the tap. Even small things matter. Watering deeply and less often encourages roots to dive. Planting neighbors with complementary root depths divides the soil into layers that more plants can share. Weaving fall leaves as a loose blanket returns the year's borrowed minerals to the bank. The more we align practice with the way plants already solve problems, the less energy we spend pushing against their nature. The network wants structure, diversity, and time. Give it those three, and it will stitch itself together with a skill older than our species. Remove any one of them, and the stitches loosen, sometimes so gently we do not notice until a hot year reveals how much we had been relying on a web we could not see. There is a small joy in recognizing these patterns in ordinary days. A balcony pot that suddenly becomes easier to keep moist after you stop disturbing its soil. A houseplant that rebounds after you lift it into brighter light and turn it half a hand each week so it can even out its lean. A street whose young trees start to look like a family once their roots find one another beyond the curb, the crowns filling in with a confidence they did not have when they were alone. The world keeps hinting that connection is not just a story we tell ourselves. It is a fact written into the structure of living systems. If you could watch it all in a sped-up dusk, you would see the daily tide of water rise in trunks as morning warms the leaves. You would see sugars move down into roots by afternoon, then out into hyphae that pass a portion along. You would see stomata closing in a neighborhood, one after another, when the air goes dry. You would see a tendril find a wire and wrap it with a grip that tightens by degrees for days. You would see the light itself shift in color at sunset, and leaves respond by preparing for night, their tiny pores relaxing and their chemistry leaning toward repair. Meanwhile, the web continues to teach us. Engineers study its structure for lessons in building systems that do not fail when one node breaks. Computer scientists borrow algorithms from root foraging to route information more efficiently through networks. Architects look at branching patterns to design ventilation that uses less energy while moving more air. Medicine looks to plants and fungi for new compounds that microbes have been making underground for eons. Chemicals honed by the constant need to negotiate with neighbors. The forest is a library, not only of wood and shade, but of solutions. It's tempting to end with a grand declaration, yet the truest closing is a quiet one. The roots do not ask for applause. The fungi do not lift banners. The signals pass anyway. Leaves lift each morning and fold each evening, regardless of whether anyone is counting. Under your feet, a slow and generous intelligence is at work, building partnerships, drawing borders, remembering seasons, and making choices that look simple only because they are repeated a billion times. So when you next pause under a tree, you can let the mind's eye drift downward, past bark and cambium, past xylem that carries water, past phloem that carries sugar, into the living dark, where roots test and thread and pause. Picture hyphae as fine as mist, carrying a spoonful of phosphorus from a seam of clay to a hungry tip. Picture a signal sliding along a thread to warn a neighbor. Picture a neighborhood that exists whether or not anyone acknowledges it, busy even when the street above is empty. The wood wide web is not a metaphor in search of wonder. It's a fact in search of attention. It's the way the green world keeps itself together, one exchange at a time, one season teaching the next. And it's the reason that stillness on the surface is never stillness within. The quiet thing below us is always thinking in its own way, always listening, always adjusting, and always ready to take tomorrow's light and turn it into life. Some flowers even change their scent after they've been pollinated, a quiet but decisive signal that the buffet is closed. To us, it may sound trivial, but in the insect world, this kind of update is the difference between wasting energy and finding food. Imagine walking into a restaurant and being told instantly whether the kitchen has already run out of your favorite dish. That's efficiency. Plants manage it chemically, in real time, with invisible fragrances shifting hour by hour. But scent is only the beginning. Some flowers don't just advertise to visitors. They actively manipulate them. The orchid family is legendary for this kind of trickery. One of the most famous culprits is the bee orchid, whose blooms resemble not just the shape, but even the perfume of a female bee. He attempts to mate with the flower, fooled by the mimicry, in a behavior biologists call pseudocopulation. It may not be fair to the bee, but in the process, he picks up pollen that he'll deliver to the next equally deceptive bloom. A little fraud, a little flirtation, and the orchid's reproductive strategy is complete. This kind of deception reminds us that plants are not passive players in their relationships with animals. They are active strategists, sometimes generous, sometimes manipulative, but always pragmatic. Pollinators may think they are in control, zipping from flower to flower, but often it is the flower pulling the strings. Plants also recruit help from creatures far outside the world of pollination. When under attack, some species release a cocktail of volatile organic compounds, VOCs, as scientists abbreviate them, that drift into the air as chemical cries for help. These airborne alarms attract predators of the herbivores doing the damage. It's not just parasitic wasps that arrive. Ladybugs, lacewings, and predatory mites also follow these invisible trails straight to the scene of the crime. To the plant, it's like outsourcing security to the local insect militia. To the insects, it's an easy meal, delivered with directions. This strategy is astonishing when you think about it. A rooted organism, incapable of running away, can still call for help and organize a defense, instead uses the power of chemistry to recruit an army. It's biological diplomacy. I'll feed you if you take care of my enemies. And it works. Farmers who grow crops like corn and beans have long noticed that healthy plants seem able to summon wasps when caterpillars begin chewing, reducing the need for pesticides. What once looked like a mysterious miracle is now understood as a carefully tuned line of chemical communication. But plants are not always benevolent broadcasters. Sometimes their chemical language is about sabotage. This darker tactic is called allelopathy, and it is less about recruiting friends than about neutralizing rivals. Black walnut trees are infamous for it. Their roots secrete juglone, a compound toxic to many other species. Try to plant tomatoes near a walnut tree, and you'll soon learn that the soil itself has been weaponized. The walnut doesn't waste energy fencing or fighting. It simply poisons the ground, so that competitors wither before they can even establish. And walnuts are not alone. Rice, wheat, and rye all release subtle inhibitors into the soil, suppressing the germination of weeds. It is an invisible turf war happening in every meadow and field. A contest of chemical shadows where victory means not sunlight or water, but empty space. To us it may look like stillness, but beneath our feet the plants are pushing, nudging, and sometimes assassinating one another with molecular daggers. Of course, this warfare is not constant and indiscriminate. Plants also eavesdrop. A healthy stem might pick up on VOCs drifting over from a wounded neighbor and quietly begin bolstering its own defenses. This kind of anticipatory behavior is immensely useful in dense plant communities. If one member of a patch is attacked by caterpillars, the odds are good that others will soon be next. Better to be ready in advance than to wait for the first bite. It's not gossip in the way humans know it, but the effect is the same. One individual's misfortune becomes another's warning. And humans, as ever, are watching closely. Researchers are exploring ways to use this natural chemical language in agriculture. Imagine spraying not a pesticide, but a harmless fragrance that tells crops, prepare your defenses. Instead of killing insects directly, the plants themselves would do the heavy lifting, thickening their leaves, pumping out deterrent compounds, and recruiting allies. Other experiments focus on breeding crops that are naturally better at releasing these signals, or at attracting helpful insects. The hope is that by amplifying nature's own conversation, we can reduce our reliance on synthetic chemicals and create farms that function more like wild ecosystems, buzzing with cooperation and resilience. Timing is everything in this world of scents. Plants don't release their messages randomly. Their communication is governed by circadian rhythms as precise as any clock. Defenses often peak in the morning, when herbivores are hungriest. Some floral perfumes crescendo in the late afternoon, when bees are most active. Others hold their breath until dusk, then flood the air with fragrances that lure moths and other nocturnal visitors. A casual sniff of a flower at noon might miss the full story. Wait until nightfall, and the entire bouquet could change. These rhythms tie communication not just to survival, but to the larger cycles of sun and moon, day and night. And so, step by step, science has revealed that the green silence we once imagined is not silence at all. Their conversations were in molecules, not words, in scents, not sounds. But they were effective. They shaped ecosystems, guided pollinators, repelled herbivores, and built the web of life we inherit today. The forest has always been alive with messages. Only now are we learning how to listen. Yet communication is only one side of the plant's strategy. The other is defense. Because if you are rooted in place, unable to flee from the jaws of an insect or the teeth of a deer, you must become a master of endurance. The green world, though serene to our eyes, is in truth a battlefield. Every leaf is a potential meal. Every shoot risks being grazed. And yet plants survive. More than survive, they flourish. Because they have built an arsenal, both visible and hidden. The first line of defense is obvious to anyone who has ever pricked a finger on a rose or brushed too close to a cactus. Thorns, spines, and prickles are the plant kingdom's barbed wire. A rose's prickles are outgrowths of its skin, sharp enough to scratch, but not true branches. A cactus spine, by contrast, is a modified leaf, evolved into a rigid spear. Hawthorns and blackberries grow thorns that are full-fledged branches hardened into weapons. Each is an answer to the same question. How do you discourage a hungry grazer when you cannot move away? The answer is, you make the grazer bleed. But armor is not always sharp and obvious. Sometimes it is soft, subtle, almost invisible. Many plants grow tiny hairs on their leaves and stems, called trichomes. To us, they may look like fuzz. To an insect, they are a forest of spikes, irritating, sticky, or even toxic. Stinging nettles turn their trichomes into syringes, each filled with a cocktail of histamines and acids that sting the skin of any passerby. A brush against a nettle leaf is unforgettable, a lesson written in tingling pain. And then there are the invisible defenses, the chemical cocktails mixed quietly within leaves and stems. These compounds are astonishing in their variety. Some are bitter, discouraging a second bite. Some are mildly toxic, sickening the grazer who doesn't learn. Others are lethal, weaponized molecules honed over millions of years. Alkaloids are perhaps the most famous of these. Nicotine, caffeine, morphine, names that ring through human culture as stimulants. Medicines, or drugs, are in origin the arsenal of plants. Nicotine, a neurotoxin, deters most insects instantly. Caffeine, so welcome in our morning cups, is in higher doses a deadly deterrent. Morphine, derived from the opium poppy, is not made to soothe human pain, but to stop herbivores in their tracks. Quinine, bitter in tonic water, is in plants a declaration of war against would-be consumers. To us, these molecules are cultural touchstones. To the plant, they are survival itself. Another class of compounds, tannins, are less flashy but equally effective. Found in oak leaves, tea, and red wine, tannins bind to proteins and make them indigestible. To a browsing deer, a mouthful of tannin-rich leaves is like chewing leather, difficult, unsatisfying, and nutritionally unrewarding. The message is clear: move along, try somewhere else. And for those who ignore bitterness, some plants keep deadlier tricks in reserve. Cyanogenic glycosides are molecules that, when damaged, release hydrogen cyanide. Even small amounts can kill insects and deter larger animals. Cassava, clover, and even apple seeds contain these hidden poisons. Cook them carefully, and they become food. Bite them raw in the wild, and they are warning labels in molecular form. Then there are the glucosinolates, sulfur-bearing chemicals that erupt into pungent flavors when chewed. Cabbage, horseradish, mustard. The sharp bite we prize in condiments is in fact a warning. To rabbits and insects, that spicy tang is nature's way of saying, think twice. Humans turned plant defense into cuisine, but to the plant, it was never about flavor. It was about survival. Defense in plants, though, is not just a matter of bitter compounds or sharp spines. Sometimes it involves building alliances. Picture a cornfield in summer. Caterpillars begin to chew on the leaves. The corn does not sit idly by. It releases a specific scent, a chemical call that floats invisibly into the air. Within hours, parasitic wasps arrive, following the signal like hounds on a trail. They alight on the caterpillars, inject their eggs, and soon the larvae inside consume the herbivores from within. It is grisly, but effective. The corn has no fangs or claws, yet it has summoned assassins. This ability is not rare. Cotton, lima beans, and scores of other species engage in the same tactic. Each can fine-tune its signal, depending on who the attacker is. A chewing insect provokes one blend of VOCs, a piercing insect another. Even mechanical damage, the slice of a blade, produces a different profile than true herbivory. The reason lies in saliva. Enzymes in insect spit trigger biochemical cascades the plant can recognize. In other words, plants can tell the difference between a clumsy accident and a predator's assault. Other alliances are longer term, bordering on cohabitation. Acacia trees, for example, are famous landlords. They grow hollow thorns and secrete nectar, not for pollinators, but for ants. The ants move in, defending the tree with relentless aggression. Graze on an acacia, and within seconds, a swarm of tiny soldiers will be biting, stinging, and driving you away. The tree offers room and board. The ants provide security. Over generations, some ant species have become so tied to their host trees that they rarely leave them. ignoring food placed nearby in favor of their thorny fortress. This is not casual cooperation. It is co-evolution, each partner shaping the other's survival strategy. And plants do not always defend alone. Some practice a strategy of community defense known as masting. Imagine a forest of oaks. For several years, they produce very few acorns. Then suddenly, in one synchronized season, every tree rains down an overwhelming flood of seeds. Squirrels, deer, birds, all gorge themselves, but they cannot possibly eat them all. Many acorns slip through the gauntlet and sprout into new saplings. Then, for years afterward, the trees return to stingy production, keeping predator populations low. It is a long-term, coordinated survival plan, written not in conscious intention, but in genetic rhythm. Not every defense is static. Some are inducible, switching on only when needed. When grazed, certain grasses produce tougher leaves within days, deterring further feeding. When attacked, tomatoes pump out proteins that interfere with insect digestion. These defenses cost energy, so plants use them sparingly, turning them on like alarms only when threats arise. Others keep constitutive defenses, permanent thorns, toxins, or thick bark, always at the ready. The balance between constant vigilance and energy-saving flexibility is one of the quiet calculations every plant makes. And beyond defense, plants employ trickery. The passion flower vine, for example, paints tiny yellow spots on its leaves that mimic butterfly eggs. Real butterflies, wary of competition and predators, avoid laying eggs where others have already staked a claim. The fake spots reduce caterpillar infestations before they even begin. Mimosa pudica, the sensitive plant, collapses its leaves instantly when touched, startling herbivores or shaking off small insects. Within minutes, it recovers, springing its green traps back into place. These are not random quirks. They are rehearsed maneuvers, subtle gestures of survival. From deception to deterrence, the green world is brimming with quiet strategies. One of the most enchanting parts of this story is not defense at all, but reproduction. The act of pollination, that ancient partnership between plant and animal. Without it, much of the food we eat would vanish. Apples, almonds, coffee, chocolate, vanilla, all depend on pollen making its way from one bloom to another. Pollination is easy to dismiss as background noise, but in truth, it is one of the most extraordinary dramas in nature. For wind-pollinated plants like grasses, the method is brute force. They release clouds of pollen into the air, gambling that a few grains will reach the right stigma. It is messy, imprecise, and to us often miserable, as anyone with hay fever can attest. But it works, sustaining vast ecosystems of grains and forests. Flowering plants that rely on animals, however, have taken the process into the realm of theater. Each blossom is an invitation, a stage set with color, scent, and nectar. To bees, flowers broadcast ultraviolet landing strips, invisible to us, patterns that guide them straight to the center. To butterflies, blooms unfurl into broad platforms with tubes of nectar perfectly matched to their long proboscises. To moths, pale blossoms glow in moonlight and release perfumes timed for twilight. To hummingbirds, flowers blush red and orange, offering deep nectar reservoirs, accessible only by hovering tongues. To bats, Blossoms hang sturdy and musky, strong enough to withstand wings and teeth in the night. Every visitor plays a role, and every flower has evolved its own choreography. Magnolia, among the oldest flowering lineages, relies on beetles. The blooms are tough, bowl-shaped, and scented, not sweet, but spicy, catering to clumsy diners that arrive more for the food than the aesthetics. Orchids, masters of manipulation, sometimes go further still, luring insects with false promises of nectar or with uncanny mimicry of mates. A bee orchid, as mentioned earlier, dresses itself in the likeness of a female bee, its fragrance fine-tuned to match pheromones. The deceived male transfers pollen in a futile embrace. It is a con, but an elegant one. And while most of these strategies are cooperative, nectar for transport, pollen for reward, not all play fair. Some flowers trick pollinators with empty promises, offering no nectar at all. Others entrap them briefly, releasing them only after pollen has been delivered. In these exchanges, the plant's reproductive success always takes precedence, even if the pollinator leaves cheated. The scale of this partnership is staggering. Globally, 3/4 of flowering plants and about 1/3 of food crops depend on animal pollinators. Every spoonful of honey, every bar of chocolate, every sip of coffee is built on these exchanges. Without them, ecosystems unravel and food webs collapse. Pollination is not background. It is the heartbeat of terrestrial life. And yet, it is easy to walk through a meadow and see only color, not the intricate conversations happening there. A bee dives into a violet bloom, dusts its legs yellow, and hums away. A moth hovers over a pale primrose at dusk. A bat dips into a cactus flower heavy with nectar. To us, it is scenery. To them, it is survival. To the plant, it is destiny. What emerges from all of this, from scents and poisons, from thorns and alliances, from mimicry and pollination, is a portrait of plants not as passive greenery, but as dynamic strategists. They do not run or shout, but they do whisper, signal, defend, entice, and deceive. They are rooted, yes, but never still. Their world is alive with hidden negotiations, each molecule of fragrance, each curve of thorn, each burst of pollen, a move in a vast ongoing game of life. So when you next pass a flowering bush or pause by a tree, consider what is really happening in that quiet. Invisible signals are drifting. Predators may be on their way. Pollinators are guided by unseen arrows of light. Defenses are ready, toxins brewing, alliances waiting. To us it seems silent, but in truth, the plants are speaking of danger and opportunity, of attraction and resistance, of survival and continuity. They have been speaking since long before we listened, and they will continue long after we are gone. The quiet exchanges of flowers and pollinators, the delicate alliances of moths and figs, of yucca and wasp, remind us that even the most rooted life is always in motion, always reaching outward in search of connection. And yet, beneath all of these partnerships lies something even more fundamental. None of it, not the bees, not the birds, not even the trees themselves, could survive without the ancient miracle that fuels it all. The green world has one secret above all others, one act of quiet alchemy that turns the impossible into the everyday. That secret is photosynthesis, the art of turning light into life. It is easy to take sunlight for granted. It warms our skin, lights our mornings, sets our shadows moving across the ground. But to plants, sunlight is not just warmth. It is the currency of existence, the raw energy that must be captured, stored, and translated into food. While animals must hunt, graze, or forage, plants build their meals out of air and light, weaving invisible threads of energy into the sugars that sustain entire ecosystems. At the heart of this process are leaves. Every blade of grass, every frond, every fluttering canopy overhead is a living solar panel, humming silently. The green pigment chlorophyll is their key. It is tuned to absorb red and blue wavelengths of light, while reflecting green back to our eyes. That reflected green is not wasted. It is simply the part of the spectrum they cannot use. What they do absorb fuels the machinery inside their cells, where every photon captured becomes a spark of possibility. Within each cell are chloroplasts, tiny factories filled with stacks of thylakoid membranes. They look, under a microscope, like piles of miniature pancakes. These thylakoids are where the first stage of photosynthesis unfolds, the light-dependent reactions. When sunlight strikes chlorophyll, electrons leap into motion. The energy is used to split water molecules, releasing oxygen as a byproduct. This oxygen drifts upward through the stomata of the leaf into the air. Every breath you take is, in part, an exhalation from a leaf. The splitting of water also provides hydrogen, which is gathered into temporary carriers, molecules of ATP and NADPH. These are the rechargeable batteries of the plant, storing energy and passing it along to the next stage. The beauty of this system lies in its efficiency. Billions of these reactions happen every second in a single tree on a sunny day. The forest is alive with tiny sparks, a galaxy of microscopic stars, quietly blazing inside each leaf. But light alone does not make sugar. That comes in the next act, the Calvin cycle, sometimes called the dark reactions, though they do not require darkness, only independence from direct light. This stage takes place in the stroma, the fluid surrounding the thylakoid stacks. Here, carbon dioxide drifts in from the air, captured by tiny pores that open and close with exquisite timing. Using the stored energy of ATP and NADPH, the plant assembles carbon atoms into glucose, the simple sugar that is both fuel and building block. Glucose is astonishing in its versatility. It can be burned immediately for energy in cellular respiration. It can be stitched together into long chains of starch, stored away in roots or stems for leaner times. It can be transformed into cellulose, the tough fibers that give plants their shape, that build trunks and leaves, and the paper you might be holding in your hand. Every apple, every loaf of bread, every bowl of rice is a gift of glucose, spun out of sunlight and air. This act, pulling carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, fixing it into sugar, is not just a plant's survival trick. It is the foundation of nearly every food chain on Earth. Herbivores nibble leaves or graze grasses. Carnivores feed on herbivores, and at every level, the energy at work can be traced back to chloroplasts. The lion that hunts, the bird that sings, the human who sips morning coffee, all are ultimately powered by photosynthesis. Consider the scale. A single, mature oak may hold hundreds of thousands of leaves. Each leaf may contain millions of chloroplasts. Each chloroplast holds stacks of thylakoids. Each thylakoid, crowded with chlorophyll molecules, catching photons of light. It is a solar farm on a microscopic scale, humming away without wires, screens, or plugs. Silent, ceaseless, perfectly efficient. But this system is not static. Plants adjust their photosynthesis with great sensitivity. In bright light, they accelerate, ramping up production. In shade, they slow down, conserving resources. When water grows scarce, many will close their stomata to prevent loss, even if it means less carbon dioxide enters and photosynthesis slows. It is always a balancing act. Water against carbon, energy against safety. For many plants, this balancing act has been refined into ingenious adaptations. Most of the world's plants use what is called C3 photosynthesis, named for the 3-carbon molecule produced in the first step of carbon fixation. But in hot, dry climates, this process falters. The enzyme at its heart, rubisco, becomes less selective in high temperatures, grabbing oxygen instead of carbon dioxide. The result is a costly mistake called photorespiration, which wastes energy. To counter this, some plants evolved C4 photosynthesis. In this method, used by corn, sugarcane, and certain grasses, the work is divided between 2 types of cells. Carbon is first captured in one location, then shuttled to another, where the Calvin cycle can proceed without interference. By concentrating carbon dioxide, these plants minimize waste, thriving in conditions where C3 plants struggle. Others, like cacti and pineapples, have adopted CAM photosynthesis, crassulation acid metabolism. They open their stomata only at night, when the air is cooler and less dry, taking in carbon dioxide and storing it in an intermediate form. During the day, they keep their pores shut tight, conserving precious water, and complete the process internally. It is a clever trick for desert survival, a way of making sugar while spending as little water as possible. These strategies are not just quirks, they are lifelines, honed by millions of years of trial and error. They explain why some crops thrive in tropical heat, why succulents endure on parched windowsills, why grasslands sweep across dry savannas. Photosynthesis, in all its variations, is not a single recipe, but a family of adaptations, each tuned to the pressures of place and climate. The impact of photosynthesis reaches far beyond the leaf. Billions of years ago, when early microbes first began to split water and release oxygen, they altered the chemistry of the entire planet. The atmosphere, once choked with carbon dioxide and methane, slowly filled with oxygen. This great oxygenation event, as scientists call it, transformed Earth. It allowed for the evolution of complex multicellular life. Every fish, every bird, every mammal is indebted to those first photosynthetic pioneers. Even now, the balance of our atmosphere rests on photosynthesis. Forests, wetlands, and oceans draw down carbon dioxide, buffering the climate. Phytoplankton, drifting in the sunlit layers of the sea, produce roughly half of the oxygen in the air. Every other breath you take is in some sense a gift from the ocean's invisible green. Meanwhile, rainforests and savannas act as carbon sinks, storing vast amounts of carbon in their trunks and soils. When we burn forests or fossil fuels, we release this stored carbon back into the air, tipping the balance. Photosynthesis becomes not just a process to marvel at, but a partner we must protect. Our climate, our agriculture, our very survival depends on the continued work of leaves and algae and grasses, quietly pulling carbon from the sky. Yet for all its planetary importance, photosynthesis remains a quiet miracle. A leaf does not boast, a tree does not proclaim, and yet, moment by moment, day by day, they perform a chemistry we could barely replicate in laboratories. They turn what we cannot use, light, air, water, into food and fuel and breath. They do it with patience, with elegance, with a persistence that has carried them across billions of years. Sit in a park on a sunny afternoon and notice the dappled light through the branches. Each shifting patch of shade is the product of countless chloroplasts hard at work. On a balcony, a pot of basil quietly churns out glucose, drop by drop, leaf by leaf. In a forest clearing, mosses shimmer in green light, doing their part. These are not backdrops. They are engines of the biosphere, factories of life. The beauty of photosynthesis is not only in its chemistry, but in its poetry. Sunlight, something we cannot eat or hold, is transformed into something we can. An apple, a loaf of bread, a breath of oxygen. It is generosity in molecular form, an unending gift given without thought of return. The generosity of photosynthesis becomes even more striking when we consider how it fuels not only survival, but growth, repair, and reproduction. Plants are not static. They are constantly building, stretching, and healing. Every new shoot, every fresh leaf, every cluster of blossoms begins with sugars made from light. Photosynthesis is not a single act, but a continuous investment, a slow but steady construction project that never halts as long as the sun shines. Growth itself is timed and tuned with exquisite precision. During daylight hours, glucose production surges, and plants allocate this bounty toward immediate energy needs. But as night falls, the process shifts. Photosynthesis pauses, and plants dip into their reserves. Starch stored in chloroplasts and stems is slowly broken down, metered out carefully so that the plant neither starves before dawn nor wastes resources by hoarding too much. In controlled experiments, scientists have shown that plants appear to calculate how much starch to consume each night, adjusting their rate of usage depending on the length of darkness. If the night is long, they pace themselves. If it is short, they spend more freely. It is as if they can tell time with their chemistry, a biological arithmetic that ensures balance. And while we cannot see this silent budgeting, its results are all around us. A sapling stretching skyward, its stem elongating in the darkness. A houseplant unfurling new leaves overnight. A vine twining a little farther along a railing. Much of the visible growth we notice in the morning happened while we were asleep, fueled by sugar collected the day before. The daytime harvest becomes the nighttime construction. The adaptability of photosynthesis also speaks to the resilience of life itself. In deserts, CAM plants keep their stomata closed through the day, clinging to every drop of moisture. In the tropics, vast rainforests rely on the standard C3 method, capturing carbon at breathtaking scale, recycling humidity, and producing clouds that drift far beyond their borders. On windswept plains, C4 grasses dominate, efficient machines that support enormous herds of grazing animals. Each version of photosynthesis is a solution, a strategy, a way of wringing life out of light in environments that test every limit. Even beyond Earth, photosynthesis holds promise. Astronauts and planetary scientists dream of growing plants on Mars or the Moon, relying on this ancient process to provide oxygen, food, and psychological comfort in alien landscapes. Experiments on the International Space Station have already shown that plants can photosynthesize in microgravity, adjusting their growth to new conditions, yet continuing the core alchemy unchanged. The green shimmer of leaves under fluorescent lamps in orbit is a reminder. Wherever light can reach, life may follow. This adaptability also highlights photosynthesis as a blueprint for technology. Scientists study chlorophyll and the electron transport chain in hopes of mimicking them. Artificial photosynthesis, using engineered systems to split water, capture carbon dioxide, and create fuel, is an area of intense research. Imagine power plants that exhale oxygen instead of carbon, or solar panels that do more than generate electricity, actually storing energy in chemical bonds like plants do. The leaf remains the most elegant solar panel ever designed, and humanity is still trying to catch up. And yet, in the ordinary, photosynthesis is equally awe-inspiring. A tomato ripening on the vine is the outcome of thousands of sunlit reactions, sugars flowing into the fruit until it swells, sweetens, and blushes red. A loaf of bread is a story of wheat fields filled with waving stalks, each grain a capsule of starch packed away from summer sunlight. A spoonful of honey is sunlight twice transformed. First by flowers into nectar, then by bees into golden syrup. At every turn, the food we cherish carries the memory of photons captured long ago. But it is not only food. Photosynthesis also provides the raw material for shelter, clothing, and countless tools. Wood in homes, cotton in fabric, paper in books. All are products of carbon fixed from air and sunlight. Even fossil fuels, the ancient remains of long-dead plants and algae, are reservoirs of sunlight captured eons ago. When we burn them, we are releasing light stored deep in time, compressed into coal, oil, and gas. It is photosynthesis stretched across geological ages, both a gift and today, a challenge as we reckon with the consequences of releasing so much stored carbon. This duality, photosynthesis as both savior and reminder, shapes how we understand our place in the biosphere. Without it, there would be no oxygen, no food chains, no breathable sky. With it, we are sustained daily, but also warned. Disrupt the balance, strip away forests, acidify oceans, and the gift falters. Protect the green machinery of the planet, and it will continue to work tirelessly on our behalf. Even in cities, surrounded by concrete and steel, photosynthesis persists. Ivy climbs brick walls, weeds push through cracks in sidewalks. Rooftop gardens soften skylines. Each green patch captures light and spins it into oxygen and sugar. Urban parks are not only places of rest, they are active lungs for millions of people. And in the quiet of dawn, when sunlight touches leaves still wet with dew, one can almost feel the city inhale. The poetry of photosynthesis lies not only in its generosity, but in its humility. It is everywhere, yet rarely noticed. The tree outside your window, the grass underfoot, the moss on a stone, all are performing chemistry more elegant than any machine. They do it without fanfare, without pause, without any need for thanks. And yet, to stop and notice is to glimpse the engine of life itself. Think of the journey of a single photon. Born in the heart of the sun, it travels millions of kilometers across space, streams through the atmosphere, and lands on a leaf. There, in a split second, it excites an electron, beginning a chain of reactions that ends in the creation of sugar. That sugar may become part of a berry, eaten by a bird, which later scatters seeds that grow into new trees. The photon's energy ripples outward, transforming into motion, sound, flight, song. The story of life is, in a profound sense, the story of sunlight finding new forms. So the next time you take a breath, bite into a piece of fruit, or walk beneath the shade of a tree, pause for a moment. The oxygen in your lungs, the sweetness on your tongue, the coolness of that shadow, All are gifts of photosynthesis. Quiet, unassuming, constant. It is not just a process. It is a promise. A promise that light can become life, that stillness can harbor motion, that even the simplest green leaf holds within it the power to sustain worlds. And perhaps that is the greatest miracle of all. Not that photosynthesis is rare, but that it is common, that it happens in every garden, every meadow, every forest, every blade of grass pushing through a crack in the pavement. Miracles are not always spectacular. Sometimes they are green, silent, and everywhere.